let's dive into our first segment of the month with, as ever, as is becoming a sort of tradition, a bit of an update. Now, in this instance, there are two updates that you, I know, were particularly keen to comment on. The first one being the Stonehenge bypass and the idea that, no, sorry, well, the Stonehenge options and the idea that the bypass has been described as being the best option in the news story, but also as well the Eleanor cross. So we'll start with Stonehenge if you can.
Yes, I mean the new viewers start here. There's a long-standing row in the UK about the government's plan to upgrade the A303 across the Stonehenge World Heritage landscape in Wiltshire. It's a long-standing issue around traffic management, and earlier on this year, the government launched a consultation about one particular proposal only, which was to build a short tunnel through the most sensitive part of the World Heritage landscape, with two large portals giving access to the two dual carriageways that we're going to be cutting across the World Heritage landscape to give access to the tunnel.
Yeah.
That that proposal has now received comments from UNESCO and ICOMOS, which are basically the international regulators for the World Heritage Site. And I think it's fair to say that if both sides maintain their current positions, we're heading for something of a crunch down the line in terms of how the World Heritage Site is managed, because a few weeks ago in UNESCO adopted a resolution about the Stonehenge and Avebury site, which, and I'll quote a couple of their comments. Here we go. The analysis. This is the analysis and conclusions. You can find this online. As usual, we'll post the links. The 2018 advisory mission, which is the most recent UNESCO advisory mission, concluded that the best option in terms of the outstanding universal value of the World Heritage Site would be, quote, a surface route which reroutes the A303 completely around the Stonehenge component of the property and enables the closure of the existing section of the A303. If the surface route is not possible, a longer tunnel is needed which removes or at least substantially reduces the proposed lengths of dual carriageway within the property in order to avoid the impact on the integrity, authenticity and outstanding universal value of the property. What that basically means is they're opposing the government proposal. They say that the tunnel's too short, there's too much dual carriageway, and ideally, actually, they should divert the upgrade completely around the World Heritage Site without touching it at all.
Which I suppose is a lovely idea, I guess. But this comes down to, or comes back to, as we so often comment on the Watching Brief, mainly political will to pay for heritage and to actually take responsibility for what is an internationally significant monument. Although I just will say, in the BBC News article here, I find it quite hilarious that often journalists feel the need to do this, but in the BBC in particular, they often have a little summary of the thing that they're talking about. So the news story is about this comment, but then right at the bottom, a little paragraph saying, Stonehenge. The first monument at Stonehenge was a circular earthwork, enclosed with a ring of 56 timber or stone posts, built around 3000 BC. And they then go on to summarise this monument in a couple of very short paragraphs, as though we wouldn't know what Stonehenge was. And then they start talking about the Preseli Hills, and it's
That's right.
it's interesting how I don't know. I'm always fascinated by some of the I suppose almost the etiquette, I guess, of journalism sometimes. It's fascinating.
Absolutely. And I think it's fair to say we, in terms of the etiquette of journalism, it's only fair that we also quote Highways England, who are the government body, arm's length body that's actually running the development, who said to the media that restoring tranquility is central to our plans. We remain confident our scheme will enhance and protect the Stonehenge landscape. Obviously, their view of enhance and protect is different to UNESCO's. It's also the case that while the three principal heritage bodies, Historic England, English Heritage, and the National Trust, who have responsibilities in the Stonehenge landscape, they've maintained a joint position up until now, and they continue it in the light of the UNESCO report. There is a slight hint in their response to the UNESCO comments that the UNESCO team may have not understood their own guidance, because they say that their responses to the consultation were in the light of their understanding of the UNESCO guidance for the management of World Heritage Sites. So there's a bit of needle developing between the heritage bodies and UNESCO. I think if it carries on the way it is, and I've been saying this for a long time, and regular viewers of Watching Brief will maybe remember, I've been suggesting that this might end in tears at some point, because there is no one position which is going to be adopted within the heritage and archaeology sector, and it there are divisions which mirror the divisions in the wider environmental movement, and even in the wider public. There's a very vociferous campaign, the Stonehenge Alliance, who are campaigning against the tunnel and the current plan in the Wiltshire area, but also certainly anecdotally and polling wise, there's evidence that many local people welcome the development because they see the A303 as a block on the local economy.
Yeah, and I can't help but wonder whether part of this, because in this instance, archaeologists are only one. We're only one community that's interested in this monument. Arguably, archaeologists should be an important consultation for this sort of landscape, but I can't help but wonder whether one way of mitigating the concern of so many archaeologists is to have detail when it comes to methodology. So there are broad statements about how this scheme would irreparably scar the landscape. But then we have, for example, statements coming from proponents of the tunnel saying, we are confident that we can deliver an acceptable tunnel solution.
Yeah.
And the report accepts we have identified the optimum location for the eastern portal. Perhaps it's not so much about the fact of something happening, but maybe actually, for example, I know that you're not necessarily the keenest bunny when it comes to the idea of digging a tunnel. Maybe if there could be a groundbreaking, no pun intended, groundbreaking approach to the methodology of digging the tunnel, something which actually allows for a segment by segment approach, not unlike some sort of sampling, or actually more to the point, maybe if we could guarantee 100% sampling, and actually time to record from the from underground any archaeology that is recovered.
I mean, stepping back from trying to treat the thing objectively, and this is purely a personal view. I think that the case has not yet been made that the short tunnel and carriageway option is acceptable. And in fact, I think there are very many reasons why it should be, at the very least, interrogated absolutely rigorously before it's adopted, and and the heritage sector has to be independent enough to, at some point, a large enough portion of it, certainly the regulatory portion of it, like Historic England, if it's deemed to be damaging to a World Heritage Site of outstanding universal value, to turn around and say to the government, actually, no, this is not acceptable, don't do it.
Well, and I suppose that's sort of partly my point, is that the soil underneath the site isn't necessarily archaeologically rich. This is arguably an opportunity to sample.
No, but this is about, it is an argument about surface. It's an argument about landscape. It's an argument about saying whether a largely rural landscape with a long-standing routeway across the top of it should be turned into a modern trunk road when it has World Heritage status. That's what the argument's about.
But it's not necessarily a trunk road, is it? I mean, an element here is that this is potentially a crown jewel of civil engineering. I mean, I'm just talking about other interest groups here.
Oh yeah.
One of the reasons why a tunnel is so appealing to some people with this project is that it would be an impressive thing, a feat. Where if it obviously if it's handled properly. So I can't help but wonder whether again there are various interests to be served here by trying to come to a middle ground as opposed to trying to say no, that is simply wrong, because let's face it, all international monuments are at risk from pollution, from earthquakes, from
Absolutely.
encroachment of, for example, in Sri Lanka, people literally living in in
Oh yeah.
historic monuments. But I just find this whole conversation very interesting, and it's interesting how as you say, how if we're not careful, and that's as you just said, it will end in tears. But I'm wondering whether or not there's a way of it not getting to that point. If there's a way of actually mitigating people's concerns.
I think it doesn't just need a judgment of Solomon. It needs a judgment of multiple Solomons in all the agencies involved, and I just don't see that happening.
No. Okay. Well, I'm not quite sure how would that apply to the monument if you cut a baby in half. I mean, it would be a dramatic statement.
You build half the tunnel and leave the other half filled. No.
Or you just bring someone like Michael Gove to the site with a chainsaw. Anyway, so
well, to be honest, actually, if the latest doomsday scenarios for the no deal Brexit come to pass, we'll probably the queues for the Channel Tunnel and the Dover ferries will probably be stretching back to Cornwall anyway next year. So hey.
Okay, yeah, and then we'll all be happy to be in a queue above ground looking at the monument.
Absolutely.
Exactly, yes.
Which actually, interestingly enough, is one of the criticisms that people say it's undemocratic to take away the view of Stonehenge from the road. That it's actually by making you have to go and park your car in the English Heritage car park at a cost of X pounds. You're having your right to enjoy the monument even briefly out of your car window taken away from you.
I'm not sure that's a right. I think that's an incidental. That's a byproduct, isn't it? Of the anyway. Okay, so the second update, in terms of the Eleanor Cross, what's going on there? I know that I suppose to lay it out briefly, the local council, the infamous Northampton
Borough Council,
they are and have been trying to decline responsibility for cleaning and maintaining a monument known as the Eleanor Cross. What's going on there?
Well, the latest update is that it would appear that the council has finally received legal advice that it does actually own the cross. It had been trying to question this as it's unclear whether they genuinely felt it, whether it was just a delaying tactic. Certainly since last year, back in March, a Freedom of Information Act shows that their legal advisors gave them chapter and verse on why they did actually own the cross. They've now reached an agreement with Historic England that Historic England will part fund the maintenance and repairs of the cross because it's now being seen as a building at risk.
Yep.
And again, cynics who've watched this process since it first broke last year are suggesting that has been Northampton Borough Council's game plan all along. They've been stalling on doing anything until they could get other people's money involved.
And in other walks of life, this is often one of the dirtier, unspoken tactics of these sorts of situations, is that the body who has responsibility for a site that they don't necessarily want to have to look after allows the site to become less than safe. And so either if it's a building, for example, that they don't want, a more recent building, and it's not nationally historically significant, it may lead to that building's demolition. In the case of this monument, it seems like they've someone else has blinked first. But at the very least, it's good that the Borough Council are having to take some responsibility for it. Because I mean, the last I heard was that it had been shown on a previous was it an audit of accounts that they had actually in the past paid for upkeep of the Eleanor Cross.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So it's games being played. Incidentally,
Well, the other game that was played again, which has been shown up from the Freedom of Information Act request, and this is there's an article about this on the pipeline.
Mm-hmm.
Back in late October, early November last year, there was a structural survey done by a specialist surveyor on the Eleanor Cross, which reported immediately to the council because there was concern that the structure was in part unsafe and therefore needed urgent remedial action.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
They put hoardings around to keep the public away, but didn't do any of the work that had been requested. And the reason they didn't do any of the work that had been requested because one of their own staff did an assessment that that basically said it wasn't as urgent as the specialist surveyor suggested.
No.
The council chose to go with their internal assessment rather than the external assessment, and so, having been told that the cross needed urgent work to stop it deteriorating through the winter, it went through the recent winter and the beasts from the east and everything else without that work being done, which arguably may have made the situation worse.
And also from the council's perspective, it's going to cost more as well. Yeah.
And from the council's perspective, they would have had to have paid out straight away, and they hadn't got the money in place with Historic England.
Well, no. I mean, it may well cost more now.
Oh, absolutely, yes.
I mean,
That's
following that decision. Well, incidentally, just for those people at home who don't know, because Stonehenge is a well-known monument, as we established in terms of why are the BBC writing that description. Well, in an article here, they just outline that the 13th century monument was erected by King Edward I in memory of his wife. And his wife was Queen Eleanor, I believe.
Of Castile.
Yes. And she died in 1290. Near Lincoln, so
and the crosses. In fact, it's a lovely story, and it's one of the reasons why people get so involved with the story of the Eleanor Crosses. People might have heard of Charing Cross Station, and that was the last Eleanor Cross because it was the Eleanor Crosses were built by King Edward on at the places where Eleanor's coffin rested on its way to be buried in London. So it's in a sense it's a sort of a surviving embodiment of one of the great medieval marriage partnerships. Edward I and Eleanor of Castile. It's a love story from the height of the age of chivalry, if you like.
It's actually kind of sweet. Yeah. Okay. Well, that's good news, and both of those updates hopefully have been well received. So. Fingers crossed. We can't guarantee, but fingers crossed. Next month we won't require an update on Stonehenge. But I wouldn't.
We are maybe not Stonehenge, but I mean Northampton Borough Council.
We shall see. Okay.
They have form, as they say.
They do. Yes, they do. Unfortunately.